So what we have here is a 97 Wrangler. Came in with water pump leaking, so we're going to go ahead and change that. I've already gotten started on a couple of things, so I'm just going to kind of make this quick because it's pretty straightforward. First thing, drain the coolant. This one's lifted and has some aftermarket stuff on the front, so the drain was easy to get to. Some of them that are stock are not going to be that easy, so you can pull out a plug in the block and drain it that way. Basically, the first steps to doing this, after draining the coolant, pull the nuts off of the fan right here on the pulley, just 4 of them. They're not very tight usually. The fan will come out. Just like so. And then I've already got the belt removed, but all you got to do here is loosen off this bolt. Oh, it's not focusing. This bolt right on this pulley here, and then back off this bolt right here, and that just is your tensioner. Pull that off. This pulley then just slides off. There's your water pump. So at this point, all you're going to have to do is disconnect this hose and this hose, unplug this, and disconnect your lower rad hose, which is right here. This one has a worm gear clamp on it, and it's from the back, so that one's not going to be very easy to get to. Aside from that, we're just going to pull out. There's just a few bolts. I think looks like we got to take this bracket off of this pulley right here. These 2 bolts right here, and we will see how it goes. Okay, so I have basically got it ready to put back together. So I'll run through quickly what I had to take off. There is a pipe that comes out of here that runs straight up here and connects to that heater hose. That you can take this off with the pipe if you just remove this idler pulley. So not a big deal. 115 mil bolt there. On this side, these 2 bolts right here that are sticking out hold on. Let's get rid of this. They hold on the bracket that holds on the power steering pump. So all you have to do with the power steering pump would normally sit about here. All you got to do is take out the 3 bolts that go here, here, and then 1 lower down. Just 13 mils, go straight through the pulley. Pull them out of here. When you slide that out of the way, then the bracket actually has a reinforcement. I don't know if I can. I don't have my flashlight, so let's go like this. There's a reinforcement or a little piece of metal that comes way back and bolts in. I think it's in this one, or there's one more back further, but it's just a 15 mil bolt right here that the bracket is held onto. So once you get this one, this one, and this one out, and then the two bolts that are bolted to the water pump housing, you can get that bracket out of the way, and then it's really easy to get to the lower rad hose clamp if you need to. Do that afterwards. Basically, I'm doing the thermostat at the same time because, well, the coolant is already out, and it just gives me more room to get to the bolts anyway, so I figured for the extra $10 and stuff for that, might as well do it. Aside from that, yeah, we will put it back together. Another quick thing to note is that to always compare your 2 water pumps, because it's a reverse rotating pump, and it says that there should be a stamp on the impeller showing that it's a reverse rotating impeller, but this one doesn't have the stamp, and neither does this one. But if you compare the 2, we can see that they are facing the same direction, so good thing to double check. Other thing too is the studs that hold the fan on have to be swapped over. A little trick, it's just called double nutting. You just slide one nut on here, another nut on top, and then you just tighten the two together, and then you can just get a ratchet, tighten the two together, get a ratchet on it, and then you'll turn the whole stud out without having to put vice grips and wrecking the threads. So that's called double nutting. Super handy on various different applications. And also one other thing is that there are 3 short bolts and 1 long bolt for this. You can see if you look at it sideways, you've got a short bolt there, and then that bolt has to be longer, and then the other 2 are both short bolts. So keep that in mind. When you are putting this pipe back on, I painted this just for fun. When you put this pipe back on, make sure you pay attention to its orientation if you put it on with this not on the car. I guess actually looking at it now, you would have to do it off the car because you wouldn't be able to spin the pipe. Basically, if this spout is pointing almost straight back from the body of the water pump, you've pretty much got it in about the right spot. These bolts, the 4 bolts that you took out to get the water pump off, clean up the threads before you put them in. 17 foot-pounds. If your threads are dirty, you're not going to be tightening it to where it needs to be. And the last thing you want is a leak after doing all of this. This is the bracket I was talking about earlier that holds the power steering pump on. So once you get your bolts on your water pump torqued down, make sure your power steering pump is far enough forward that you can clear the bracket. You just slide this guy down here. It's hard to do with one hand. Let's see what I can do here. But anyways, that is the arm that I was talking about that slides way back down the back of the block and bolts on back there. Basically, just get the bracket mounted to these 2 bolts on the water pump housing, and then make sure you can get the back bolt in before you tighten everything up, because if you're slightly off, one of the bolts aren't going to line up. Just keep everything loose till all the bolts are in. Okay, so I've got a power steering pump on and my bracket back on here. So again, all these bolts are finger tight. These 3 power steering pump bolts, the 2 bracket bolts, and then the 1 brace bolt that goes back to the block. Once you got all that finger tight, then you just go ahead and tighten it up. I always like to do when I'm cleaning off gasket surfaces is I always use a sanding block. It just ensures that when you're sanding it flat and you're not making any like pits or anything like that if you were to be using some kind of power tool. That, and it also allows you to see pitting and stuff. So any of these dirty marks are they're pitted into the material. It doesn't need to be perfect, but you know, it needs to be as good as you can possibly get it. When you're doing the thermostat housing, take like a piece of emery cloth and just go around where the hose connections are and clean off any coolant buildup that might be on there, because, well, that's just going to be another place for coolant to leak out of, and you don't want that. Okay, so I'm going to put the thermostat in here, slides in just like this. This thermostat doesn't have a jiggle valve, so its orientation is not critical. So that guy's just going to sit in there. And then this gasket I actually got for the thermostat housing was adhesive on one side, so that's super handy. And this guy will just go on here, and can't see with my hands here. Just like so. Again, make sure the surface is nice and clean on both sides, and bolt it back together. Okay, so another thing is thermostat housing bolt torque is 13 foot-pounds according to Haynes. And then also I could put back on this idler pulley right here. See that one that blocks that pipe from coming out that's attached to the water pump. Yes. And now we can go ahead and put this connector back on here. We can get these hoses here back on. Like so. And this one here. Just like that. And that's gonna be pretty much it for the water pump and thermostat stuff. Okay, so tightening these fan bolts can get a little bit tricky because the pulley is just gonna spin under the belt. It's just smooth, so it doesn't have much grip. So what I do is I stick a screwdriver just underneath the shaft here and then just pull back on one of these bolts, and then it'll stop it from rotating, and then you can just give that. Doesn't need to be super tight. You're not gonna get a torque wrench on there, so I don't even know what the torque is. Just do it snug. Again, they're not super tight bolts to begin with. And then just rotate it by one bolt and then continue tightening. I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, but once you get the belt back on, you tighten it up using this bolt here that's on the bracket, and then this pulley bolt right here acts as the lock. So once you get the belt tensioned enough, you know, there's no science to it. It's kind of just, you know, until it's, you know, it doesn't need to be singing tight, just needs to be not loose. You can kind of feel it when you're tightening up when it starts to get tight. Then you know, a little bit more, and then that's good too. And then after you got the belt tensioned to where you want it, you just tighten up this bolt down here, and that's it. I didn't show it while it was on the car, but the reason the water pump was leaking was, well, this whole shaft was just wobbling. When the engine was running and it was turning, you could see the whole pulley just shaking like this, just constantly going back and forth. And you can see it's actually grooved the inside there. You can see where the impeller spins. It's grooved the casting there. And not only that, but the pulley actually moved far enough in that it's grooved out this part of it too. So just a little bit of play in that. And I don't think the water pump is actually leaking out of the weep hole. I think it was just the gasket that was leaking, but either way, got a water pump. Okay, so we're all done here. Everything's tight, fan's tight, belt's tightened up, filled the cooling system. I got an airlift machine that I tried using for the first time. Not sure if I did it exactly correctly, but for the most part, it seemed to work good. It took about a minute to fill it. No air leaks. I did, however, top it up just the regular way after, made sure the rad was full, filled up the overflow tank, and let it run until both the upper and lower rad hoses are pretty much the same temperature. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You're good to go.